fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCW 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
You are back in the House of Mystery, and I'm Al Warren. And today, sitting in sidelines, we got the game. We got
That's right. Emphasis on the game.
Game.
I mean, game. Yes, it's Brian. And hello, nice to be back.
It's the game. Yeah, you've been gone for a long time.
I know, too long. Don't take it personal, all right? Well, actually, you can take it personal. It was mainly you anyway. So.
Well, of course, I always upset people. I forgot who you were. I mean,
that's why you're like, who's the game again? Oh, yeah.
Who's the game? The game. Well, so what's going? So now you are back and in the crack, and everything's good.
Yeah, that's definitely how you think about it for sure.
How's the Mind's Eye podcast going?
Mind's Eye's, it's on a little break right now because I am writing a book, not a little different from our guest tonight, Garrick. I'm focusing on that, and I'm almost done. So I really wanted to put all my effort. I can't do like a million projects like you, Alan. I just don't have that skill level and that focus. So I got to focus one at a time.
It's because I'm all alone and I have nobody to love me. That's why
I didn't want to say it, but I'm glad you did.
Well, so sure. you're writing different than Garrick. You're writing instead about the Turkish pretender. You're writing about the Turkish bash.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And I really go into the history of it. I'm sure Garrick can talk a little bit more about the Turkish bath than I can, but I like to learn from all, for sure.
Oh, of course, you're a watcher. Oh, voyeur, I think they called you. That's what the voyeur game.
Only with these two gentlemen right here, for sure.
Yeah, well, gentle. There you go. You obviously don't know our guest. So our guest is the returning, and he's known as the gentle Garrick Jones. Thanks for being here, Garrick.
My pleasure. Nice to be back again. G'day, fellas.
G'day, yeah.
Hello.
So what's going on? How's Garrick been the last little while, like all this stuff?
Today's been the first sort of real lull in my life for months. I somehow managed with editors changing around deadlines and publishers, ended up sort of juggling 4 books at once. And one of them's just released last week, so I've just got a bit of a breathing space now. But it's been very, very busy. I really don't like multitasking that much. But yeah, apart from that, the COVID situation where I live in the small coastal town on the Great Barrier Reef hasn't really affected us much. We've only had 1 week of compulsory mask wearing in the past 2 years. And I'm fully jabbed. And so life goes on.
Well, you were fully jabbed before the...
Not for a number of years, Alan.
Especially when you two get it together, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's, so I always wonder about this with writers because it takes so much of you in the book, especially when you're adding a lot of yourself to it, like in fictional stories as well as historical, and you're putting it together. So none of this sort of has bothered you the last year or so, and now with Russia and everything going on.
Oh, yeah, well, exactly. Incredibly, that this latest book that's just come out, The Servants of the Crown, The Turkish Pretender, is based in 1855 in London at the end of the Crimean War. And it has lots to do with Russians and the Crimea, timely. And there's mention of Ukraine in it as well. And, of course, I wrote this book 5 years ago, so there was a bit of prescience there. It's been on my mind when I was checking the final proof, which was just about the time that the first invasion started. It resonated quite a bit.
Yeah, it's something that never, I don't know, it just never ends, does it? It's something you're writing about that happened so long ago is still really happening now.
Yeah, and of course, then everybody says, "Oh, you're riding the wave of a popular thing," and you have to try to explain. Well, no, book was written in 2017. Not yesterday. Books don't write themselves unless you're incredibly prolific in a matter of weeks. I mean, my books usually take about 3 months for the first draft, and probably about a year after I've written the first draft before they get to the publisher.
Yeah. Well, if you were riding the wave, you'd throw a pandemic in there.
Oh, exactly. And I'm a bit sick of pandemic books, to be honest. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Loving the pandemic. I'm going to barf if I hear one more.
Yeah.
Read one more book about that.
Yeah, I can't.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I just picked up a book I hadn't read for years and years. There used to be a Men on Men series, which was a whole collection of short stories. I don't remember it, published in the 80s and 90s. And I was just reading Men on Men 3, and it was all about the AIDS crisis. And of course, we don't really think about that anymore. But every book written by gay people and about gay people was about death.
Yeah.
In that period.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the same now. But the thing is, it's crazy now because every time I go to put on Netflix or something like that or streaming, you go through 10 or 20 movies and it's some sort of end of the world pandemic, virus, disease, and or zombie. Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, it's,
Asteroids, that's the other one.
Yeah.
Crashing into Earth.
It's all the end. Gloom and doom.
Yep.
Yep. So, okay, what brought you to write this book?
This is a really interesting story, and I hope it doesn't get too boring. But when my first book was published with Manifold Press in the UK, I got to meet a whole lot of interesting young UK writers and older UK writers. And I was introduced to one particular writer who was very, very interesting. We spent a lot of time chatting in a forum, and he was a young disabled man and just getting into writing, and asked me if I'd be interested in co-writing a book as an exercise. I said, sure. And we wrote this book, which was called Undercurrents in those days. And I sent the book to the publisher, and who was not real happy with it, said it just read like two different people writing separately. And I quite agreed. But just at that point, it was discovered that this particular young man had been catfishing us, including the publisher, and wasn't actually a young disabled man in a wheelchair, but an older woman in her 60s in a wheelchair pretending to be a man.
Alan can obviously relate to that, but,
Oh, my God. Well, it was a huge shock because, in the course of the conversation over the year that we've been writing it, there was all sorts of quite intimate exchange. This wasn't sexual, but talking about very private things and experiences. And I suddenly realized, I'd been pulled into this conversation in some sort of vicarious enjoyment by this older woman pretending to be a young man. I never was interested in flirting or anything like that, but just disclosing personal details because, this young guy said he'd never had any sexual experiences and wanted to know what X was like. And so it was really, really creepy. So eventually the publisher got the rights back, and I retained the rights to the whole book and stuck it away in a cupboard and ignored at me because I really found the subject and the period interesting. So last year I decided to rewrite the whole thing in my own words. I changed all the characters. I kept the basic plot the same. And then when I submitted to the publisher, they absolutely loved it. So that just came out last week. But it was a very rough time. Left me feeling really dirty for a long time afterwards.
That's a lot to chew on right there. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
And I want to come back to the book in a little bit, but just because it's such a crazy story. You never had any indication that never at all.
Yeah.
Wow. Huh.
The only indication I ever had was that we were talking about the Napoleonic Wars, and I asked in an email, as you do, whether he'd ever seen the Hornblower series with Ioan Griffith, and said no. And I said, well, I'd love to send you a copy for Christmas. And he said, we haven't got a post box. We live miles away from the post office and everything. So I sent it to a friend, and I should have twigged then that there was something wrong going on.
And how did you get reached out to by this person? Just because it's just it's so wild to me How'd you connect?
It was in this chat room. We're talking about writing, and this young guy was saying he was just starting out and just wanted an exercise. I thought it would be a really good exercise for me, seeing how other people write, because I was relatively new to writing myself. And I just wanted to see how another author's mind thought. But I really liked the story. And although I didn't always agree with what he wrote, I thought, well, let's see what the publisher thinks. And of course, I didn't like it.
And it's funny because you still refer to that person as a he, as him, but knowing it's a woman. Whatever happened to this person?
I have no idea, but they were ostracized from the writer community. It was one of those big scandals. Do you remember Josh Lanyon, the big scandal with Josh Lanyon, who writes a lot of crime novels, and actually, catfished the whole writing community by saying read books written by a man about men, and actually turned out to be a woman.
Oh.
And is still writing and as a woman, and has been accepted by the gay romance community, which is mostly women readers anyway. But
wow,
yeah, that's their story. I mean, they write really well, but that whole idea of pretending to be something that you aren't doesn't sit well on my shoulders.
No. That's
and you can usually pretty well tell if there's a sex scene. Once you start reading, you go, no. Guys don't do that. I mean, we do a lot.
How dare you?
But we don't do that.
but we don't do that.
It was way too tender. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I wrote to one woman. I said, you might have to edit this out. I said, just, when you go home, just ask your husband to stick it in
How dare you?
in the ironing with no preparation and see how you think it feels. Anyway, so this experience of writing, it was pretty cathartic at the time, because I thought to myself, geez, I must be really getting old to being hoodwinked for such a long, long time. But the writing was it was so engaging in a way that made me feel really sorry for this person who I thought was a young guy in a wheelchair. When I rewrote it, it was a cleansing process. I think I wrote a much, much better story. And it was all in my own voice, of course, which makes the book cohesive, makes it coherent from the beginning to end, so it doesn't feel like a whole lot of chopped up dialogues written by a committee.
Right. Oh, so let's tell the listeners, what is the basic premise of the book?
The basic premises of the book is a rumor that was going around during Queen Victoria's reign that her father had entered into a morganatic marriage. That means a marriage of a noble person with a base-born person, and had fathered a son. And then when his father, George III, had found out, dissolved the marriage, and the child had been spirited away. So the premise behind this story is this clique of disaffected English noblemen and Irishmen who were really unhappy with a woman on the throne, and Queen Victoria's husband was very, very unpopular in the 1850s, and they hatched this plot to bring this child, the pretender, who'd been brought up in Turkey, and overthrow the throne and install him as the king, as a puppet king, because the way they brought him up was without him learning English, only being able to speak in French and Russian, and they were going to rule through him. So that's the premise of the story. But it's actually about a group of 4 young men called the Brothers, who grew up together, and two of whom grew up together, and the other 2 who they met in their teenage years, who've been friends for 20 years, and who 2 of them work for the Foreign Secretary as what I call intelligencers, which is the Victorian equivalent of spies. And this group of the 4 are tasked with uncovering the plot, finding out who's behind it, and stopping the pretender from arriving in London, so that the plot to overthrow Queen Victoria can be foiled.
When you put this together, how do you decide what you're going to do with the story? Like there's truth, there's history, and then there's fiction. How do you draw that line?
It all has to be based on historical accuracy. That's the way that I write. When I write, the majority of my time is researching before I put a word on the page. So I did a lot of research on London in the 1850s, the hospital system, just what people did, a lot of research into the aristocracy and the use of titles and deference and who went where, who was living where, what sort of jobs were available. And because it revolves around a major British shipping line, a lot of research into goods and traffic by clipper and early steamboat. So once I got that all worked out and I had all the facts in place, then I was able to slot the story into around those historical facts. Because there's nothing worse than reading something where you go, oh, no, that couldn't have possibly happened because on that date, Fred Bloggs was in, I don't know, wherever.
Yeah. When you get all the facts together and you've got it all laid out, kind of basically what's going on, how do you decide where you're going to bring the story to, or what you're going to tell in the story?
Well, I always have an idea of what the plot is before I start. And I'm a pantser. You know what that means?
Oh, yeah, by the seat of the pants.
Yeah, I'm a pantser. So I always have a beginning in my mind, I have an end in my mind, and I have the denouement, or the big action crisis scene in my mind before I start. So I know somehow, as I'm writing, it always leads me to those points, and where I place the action and where I place the human interest, or where I slot little bits of history into the dialogue without it being an information dump. I don't know, it's sort of a reasonably natural process for me.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't say it's easy.
No, it wouldn't be. And I never wear pants myself, so I'm not a pants.
He's a deep pantser.
He's a deep pantser, yeah. No,
Well, I live in tropical Queensland. You can imagine what life's like up here.
Oh, God, yeah,
That's why I asked if we were doing video.
Yeah. Well, there we go. I missed my chance.
We can switch over. We can easily switch over.
We'll get the TV going. Yeah. Mystery TV. We'll watch it.
Yeah.
Well, but I always find it interesting that you put together a story and it's centered on the truth. But when you say human interest, so do you have an how do you say, kind of something you want to get across to people, like a subtext?
Always.
Yeah.
Always. The subtext with all of my books, and this is the 9th one I've had published. I'm a very, very lucky writer. My basic ideal in all of my books is to demonstrate that gay men are not a race apart. We just are like any other man in the world. The only difference is that we might go home to a partner of the same sex. We can be bricklayers, we can be judges, we can be labourers, we can be whatever you want to call it. And we don't define ourselves by sexuality, most of us. We just happen to be gay. And that's what I tried to put in my books, the normality of most of the gay men's lives in the world. And I translate that historically as well, as I'm writing.
How do you feel like the modern day gay community finds that? Because everybody's so into identifying themselves as and labeling and stuff, like because I'm like in your age category, and I'm always sort of I always wonder why everyone's so.
Well, I suppose being brought up in I grew up in the 1950s, where that was a period where people knew other people were gay, but you never actually talked about it. In fact, no one ever talked about their personal life because it was considered bad manners. If you started talking about somebody's personal life, you were branded a gossip and people would not like you much. So also gay men during that in the 1950s and the early 1960s, we learned to compartmentalize our lives, living double identities, if you like. And it was no great hardship. I suppose modern people think it is some sort of like, oh my God, it must have been terrible walking around with your collar pulled up and your hat over your eyes so nobody recognized you. It wasn't like that. You just learned to behave in different ways. Like speaking two languages. You speak English at home, you speak Italian out in the community if you live in Italy. It's just part of the way that we're brought up. But this whole identity of the gay community, somebody once said to me, we just had the Mardi Gras here, the Sydney Mardi Gras, and somebody once said to me, for every single guy on one of those floats, and there must be thousands of them, there's 20 or 30 other guys out there living in the community who don't actually think about, don't identify themselves with the gay community. There's just their sexuality that differs. And I think we need to keep that in mind, that the visible gay community is really the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in society, to him, it's no great thing. The fact that they happen to love another man or they happen to like sleeping with other guys, the same with women as well. If they have a partner or they like sleeping with somebody of the same sex, it doesn't define who they are. It's just, part of their lives. So that's what I tried to do in every book I've written, is just to describe that normality of life of people who don't necessarily identify as within the community, in inverted commas.
How do you tackle that? Like, how do you do that without trying to emphasize on the gay parts of the people, but yet let them know they're gay? Like, what?
Well, if you read any detective novel written by anybody in the whole of history, you write it exactly the same, except that the protagonist might have a boyfriend. In my Clyde Smith mystery series, which you've already interviewed me about, Clyde's just an ex-war veteran. He's been a cop and now he's working as a private detective. He has connections through his close circle of friends who are gay men, to what gay life's like. But at those days in the 1950s, there weren't gay clubs. Not in Australia. I know there were gay bars and stuff in the US, and we didn't have bathhouses in the same way that you did in the States all the way through. We had Turkish baths, but that was completely sort of different thing, and they were never pick-up places. So he just goes about his life, and it's just like a regular detective crime fiction book, except he's got a boyfriend.
Right. Well, I think that when you read Brian's book, you'll realize that there was a pickup joint in the Turkish bath.
Yes, we did. We went over this. Yeah, that's how I inject my life into my own book personally. What about you? I mean, how do you inject, outside of getting through this idea, the normality of being gay, and putting that into your books? How do you inject your own personal life into it outside of that aspect?
In many, many ways. I wrote a series. My first book published was a book called The Boys of Boolaroo, which is a collection of 6 short stories spanning 6 decades in the 20th century. And each one of them is about different aspects of men at war or in between the wars, and forming friendships and meeting other guys and falling in love. And nearly every one of those 6 stories has something autobiographical in it. In fact, the last story in it is basically the story of me meeting the great love of my life, who was an American soldier on R&R in 1966 on the beach in Sydney. So, but I put that in the story. I think it's really, I've had a very interesting life. I had 30 years as a professional opera singing all over the world. When I left that, I went into lecturing in university in history. So I've had a lot of experiences, and I try to bleed those into my stories to give it some sense of reality and grounding, so that it's not all just fiction, but there's some truth behind. See, for example, I never write about any place that I've never lived in or visited for any, spend any amount of time in. I just don't think that that's right.
Yeah, there's definitely a feel. There's something you pick up when you go to these places.
Oh, for sure. You've only got to go in any country in the world and have a look what the regular cup of coffee is. And I mean, it's not the same in any country in the whole wide world. You just realize that every culture has something completely different to it.
So when I read some of your books and I see the gay opera singer turned writer, it's pretty obvious that is you, not just a character. Then
yeah.
we can expect that one.
Yeah,
please.
I did. One of my really popular books is a book. It's a theatre murder mystery set in 1902, in which I talk about during the crime investigation and everything. I talk about what it's like to be a performer and what it's like backstage, what it's like to be in the dressing room, what it's like when you're putting your makeup on or trying your costumes on, what it's like to rehearse, what it's like standing backstage and watching all the scenery move. And people found that really, really fascinating, because there's not much out there about that. And also having a gay protagonist and a murder mystery, it's been very, very popular, that book.
He's made plenty of men sing. There's lots of
You reverse the role. I like it.
Yeah.
All over YouTube. He's got them all screaming at the top of their lungs. It's like,
Yeah, this, interestingly enough, this is slightly tangential. In the course of writing, I've worked with 4 really, really, really amazing editors. I was having a discussion this morning with my new editor in the UK, Nick Taylor, about how not necessarily finding an editor, but finding the editor for you is so important, because when you actually write a book, you need somebody who needs to get what you're about and not try to make it their version of your book. So that's been a really interesting process all the way along. I've been so fortunate to have had 4 amazing editors, 2 of whom I still work with. Nick, who's going to be editing my next Clyde Smith book, which goes to him tomorrow to come out in October, and Linda McQueen, who's the editor for Yale University Press in London, who edits my World War II series. It's just reassuring to get that, what do you call it? So like an iron fist in a velvet glove treatment. And that really pushes any writer on to feel validated in their craft.
So you must be fascinated with the history and stuff. What's your favorite era, like 1900s?
My favorite era, I suppose, is the 1950s, because that's the era in which I grew up, surrounded by a whole lot of men who were basically what I call ruin men, who came back from the war and put on smiles and tried to be happy, but were like just traumatized inside. My whole life was, as a young man, was brought about these guys who would get in, start punching each other up. I mean, had a couple of beers to try and, get rid of the violence. I'm really fascinated by that era of the new world, where everything old was thrown out. We're going to have a complete new society after the Second World War. But the whole thing staffed, if you want to say the word, or led by these ruined guys who just had all of this.
How dare you!
Side that they were told to just smile and get on with life, get married, no matter what you did. I've just finished reading, for the 3rd time, Berubet's book, Coming Out Under Fire, which is his book about the American military and gay people during the Second World War. And that whole thing of all these guys coming back and just getting married because they had to, when they're basically gay. I'm fascinated by that period, because I didn't understand it as a kid, but as I got older, I understood, what these guys were going through.
No, and do you think like the pendulum has swung to the opposite way? And with the generational difference, they had to get married, and now obviously people are more open. I mean, what type of impact do you think that
I
has?
think there's still a lot of that going on. I've got a friend who 5 years ago, after 40 years of marriage, decided when the kids left home, and grandchildren and stuff, suddenly decided he'd been gay his whole life and left his wife. And I think, well, why the hell? And he said to me, I got married because that was what was expected of me. It still goes on. You still get guys. I mean, I did a lot of, Alan and I were talking about this when we were talking about my book Wheelchair, when I did a lot of research with vets and cops and stuff like that about what do you call it, beats, is that the word? Places where men pick each other up.
Oh, yeah.
Alan would know that,
Cruising places, right. So, and he said, one of the guys said to me, most of the guys that he meets in these parks and places are all married guys. So there's still a lot going on. I don't think a lot of that's progressed. I think the awareness of gay people has moved on a lot, and generally society's been accepting, but I think a lot of men still struggle with the notions of what it is to be a man, with the notions of masculinity.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a lot of men that live let's say, the standard lifestyle, they're married and kids and that, but it's part of who they believe they should be.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who's been in the military and who will be really, really super honest will, especially, I don't know about these days, but people in places of war or conflict or something will tell you that there are moments when they have been tempted, if or not have given in.
Do you think that shame that, I guess, even though it's still there in depending on the part of your world, but do you think that shame that was given to gay people, has now been transferred to those who identify as trans and are trans?
Look, I think I think we have a circle of hate. Every decade there's somebody new to hate. There's a whole lot of,
As a Jewish man, I get it. Trust me.
Yeah.
You know.
What's the worst thing about society? Somebody asked a question, and my answer is enforced religion. I mean, people should be be free to choose what they worship and not to proselytize and not to judge other people. What goes on in the USA? I mean, we sit here and shake our heads so often about, stuff that goes in the name of so-called Christianity, which has actually got nothing to do with Christianity at all. It's about, I don't know what it's about, giving people an opportunity to hate other people. And I suppose it goes for all religions. I shouldn't just pick on Christians. But, we see hate everywhere. And it's cyclical. It moves from one subject to another. After trans people, it'll probably revolve to, I don't know, what's left.
Yeah. It just goes back and forth. We'll go back to the Jews.
We're always there. Don't worry. We're always part of one big time for sure.
I mean, why define a person by what they do and not by who they are? Mm-hmm. That's also something that I try to write about, that people get attracted to other people by who they are, not by what they look like, not by what they do. It's what we fall in love with people properly. It's because of who the people are. Otherwise, you wouldn't get. You go see some really, really amazingly good-looking guy with a really maybe not so glamorous-looking woman, but they get together not because of the way each other looks, but because of the way that they feel about each other, who that person is. There should be a lot more of that in this world. We should get rid of reality TV, put the Kardashians in the wood chipper, and start to talk about real people.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself.
Well,
we
Aussies, we say it as it is.
Is that because of the history there? Because you guys, modern era post-Aborigine, because obviously I think most people are familiar that established as a penal colony. Do you think that's what that stems from?
Most certainly. But we have a thing called, I'm not sure if you know about it, but you need to probably read up. It's called the tall poppy syndrome, which means we don't like people who stick their heads up above everybody else. For example, it's really considered it's considered really downclassed to blow your own trumpet. So that whole thing of flaunting money and getting people to judge you by your wealth or your standing doesn't sit well with us. So we really like to take the piss out of people. Our Prime Minister's getting so much rubbish at the moment, quite publicly, called a liar in public and stuff like that. That would probably not happen in many other countries in the world. But we do.
For what though? What is he getting called out for specifically?
Oh, don't start me.
I just read the engine. I just let you go.
Well, if you have a look at I don't know if you know, we did a huge $100 billion deal with the French for submarines,
right.
Which the Australian government cancelled. And Macron, when he was asked, he said we didn't get any notice. And he said, do you think the Australian Prime Minister lied to you? And he said, I don't think. I know he did. And so that's one of the things. And plus, he does love to tell lies, our Prime Minister, and he's caught out on so many of them. And even when he's confronted with the truth, he still disavows it.
Yeah.
Sounds like a politician to me.
Well, it's a right-wing politician. We have this fashion all over the world of our Prime Minister. You had Trump, Boris Johnson, Bolsonaro, the guy in Belarus, whose name I can't think of. Yeah. These dictators all over the world who just blurt out untruths, and they get away with it.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how you can get away with it. It makes no sense. You take the characters in this book, like in The Servants of the Crown, for instance. How do you develop them when they're already dead? Like, this is a long time ago. How do you fill in the blanks? Like, what's your method?
Well, I do a lot of research about domestic life in the period that I'm writing in. So, for example, if you look at, do you know about Mrs. Beaton's cookbook? You must have heard of that.
Yeah.
No? Yep. For example, she has a huge section about how the lady of the house should act what the maid does, what the valet does, what the footman do, what the scullery maid does. So just reading through that in a cookbook gives you a pretty good idea of how an aristocratic household works. And then you'd read a lot of literature of the period about the relationships between the aristocracy, the middle class, and the working class. And then you start to formulate what this person might be expected to do, which gives you a pretty good idea of the way they're going to travel through the book. In this particular book, the main character is the eldest son of a third son, and he isn't expected to inherit anything, and by total misfortune inherits a baronetcy when he's not prepared for it, and has to take over a huge global shipping company and a title and huge houses, and he really doesn't want it. So it's not a book about, oh, this is great, isn't this fantastic, we'll make this guy into a bright shining star. It's about his journey of struggling with moving into a different class of society and not wanting it.
Yeah, I always find that to be the most interesting. How do you think it's, now that you've published the book, how do you think it's changed you?
It's actually taken a huge weight off my shoulders because, as I told you before, I can't tell you how much that awful episode affected me. I mean, I'm a pretty grown-up man. I've been on the earth a long time. I hate being taken for a ride, and I really, really was. So writing that book actually sort of cleansed that whole episode out of my life. It also gave me a lot of satisfaction of writing in a style that I don't normally write in. It's sort of like semi-Dickensian style, using the language and the form of syntax and vocabulary that was used in the 1850s. And to try to form really relationships as they might have been through the norms of society, what was expected in society. And that was and also discovering what it was like to be a gay man during that period. There's quite a lot of literature come out about that recently, including a whole book about Victorians and their servants and sexuality. So, that research just made me feel good. I love researching, so that was like a tick in the box for me, having done that.
One thing that I find curious about that time, now this is long before gays were even legal. There was the mindset that being homosexual, you were probably sick mentally and you needed help, or you should just be put away in jail, and you're something bad, no matter what point of view it was. So with that being in the world that you live in, did they ever have the concept or the idea of having a relationship with another man, not just
of course
sex?
They did.
What I'm trying to get at is, how would they see it in their mind?
They basically wouldn't talk about it for a start in sort of aristocratic circles, and even in aristocratic circles, if they knew somebody was gay or queer or anything, they just accepted it as long as they behaved properly. They might tut to their spouse, but they would never ever talk about it. And people, this is a period where men had 2 or 3 mistresses. Remember, they got married for money, for dowries, or the whole concept of marrying for love was not a great thing then. It might have been written about in Jane Austen's books, but it was an expectation of marrying within your class to further the line. And most people got married to somebody they never really knew. And men had mistresses. They went to brothels. They went to molly houses, which was a gay brothel. There were millions of those around. So it was really well understood. And in the working classes and the poor classes, of course, it was just like it was during the Depression for a lot of men. There were a lot of straight married men who didn't have any money, went out and stood on the curb and waited for some guy to come and pick them up and give them a blow.
Oh my!
Job in their car. That's where our concept of the masculine gay man comes from. That is that period of the Depression from America, where all of a sudden so-called straight men started, being available for sex, for money. But the same thing happened in Victorian England. There's all sorts of scandals about gay bordellos where members of the aristocracy were caught, and of course quite famous long-standing relationships between earls and dukes with their valet, who was their personal manservant. It was the way that they managed to continue to keep a thriving relationship going, was having a close personal servant, where they couldn't have with another member of the aristocracy, for example.
Who's the most famous person of that era that we know now is gay? You know,
I knew you were going to ask me that, but I have to look it up. There's actually a book called Victorians, Their Servants and Sexuality. It's in the other room. I could go and drag it out if you like. But there is quite a famous, I think he was an earl, and his relationship with his valet was very, very long, you know, right throughout their lives, and everybody knew about it.
But they wouldn't, in their mind, they wouldn't be thinking like marriage.
No, I think that they probably would have liked to. No, I think they probably would have liked to. You see, up until what a lot of people don't, I can't see this book. I'm sitting right near my bookcase. There's a book about same-sex relationships within the church, and here it is. It's called The Marriage of Likeness by John Boswell. It's a very, very good, interesting book, and it's subtitled Same-Sex Unions in Pre-Modern Europe. And in that book, you'll read about a whole lot of religious ceremonies that were performed right up until the 14th century, solemnizing relationships between men. That's something that people don't realize, that, you know, the church was, you know, giving blessings to gay marriages up until the 13th and 14th centuries. So, you know, where did it change? I mean, we look back at ancient Greek, ancient Roman societies where, you know, men slept with their slaves, their male slaves, and they had relationships with each other. Where did it all change? And I hate to say it's this prevalence of sort of puritanical Christian ethic. I can't comment on Judaism or Islam because I don't know much about that. But if it's based on Old Testament stuff, then I probably will think it's pretty frowned upon. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no doubt. For some reason, that's you know.
I mean, is there any actual place in the Bible where it's like anti-gay? Like, you know, I haven't read the New Testament, you know, or anything like that.
Not in the Old Testament. In the New Testament is, but we have, to my mind, and this is probably going to create a whole lot of hate mail, but there was a Council of Nicaea, I think it was 430 something or other, 400 years after the death of Christ, where a whole lot of church people got together and they decided what was going to be in the Bible.
Right.
So the Bible was written by a whole lot of blokes 400 years after Jesus lived. And there were certain books from the Bible cut because they didn't fit in with male patriarchal ideas. There's a book of Mary Magdalene, for example. So women didn't get a look in. And who knows? I don't know if there were any first like documents of the letters of St. Paul. I don't think we have a document actually written in his handwriting. And he's the one who talks about you know, men laying together in abominations. I may be wrong. I may have got that all muddled up, but still goes on. I mean, go out if you're a farmer, go out into any field and you see cows jumping on each other and bulls jumping on each other and stuff. It's part of nature, homosexuality. It's not a learned thing. It's a genetic thing. That's my 2 cents worth.
I'm all excited here. So now, let's talk about people getting a hold of you, and all the hate mail goes to you. So how is it people contact you?
Through my website, which is just GarrickJones, one word, .com.au. And there's on my website, there's a link of how you can get in touch with me, write emails to me. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter as well. Where else? Oh, well.
Grindr?
No. I saw a wonderful mug the other day, which had on it, I met your dad on Grindr, and I was wondering if I could buy, who do I know I could buy that and send that to?
Boy, you have to be careful there.
Well, if you do get some hate mail, I've learned that if as many people hate you as they do love you, you're probably actually doing something right instead of something wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. The worst review I've had two. I'm very, very, very lucky. Again, not only getting published so much, but having really, really good reviews. But the two worst reviews I've ever had was somebody who bought The Boys of Bullaroo, which is all about the war and guys fighting together, who gave it 1 star and said, "This book is full of homosexuals." I felt like saying, "Read the
Oh my.
blurb, you idiot." And the other one was about a woman who wrote a short story that was published by Manifold Press, actually set in Canada. And it's called Oh Canada, the story. And she wrote and she said, "I didn't like this story. It's too male."
Wow. Then you write, "I didn't like this reviewer. It's too female."
Oh. You go, what goes through these people's minds? What do? They look at the picture and go, "Oh, I'll buy that book because it's got a pretty cover." That is my idea, is the very, very worst reason for buying a book. You know, the reason for buying a book is what's between the front cover and the back cover.
Well,
And you can, and a good cover helps, but you know, if you buy a book and people can't string 3 words together, what's going to make you buy another book by that writer?
yeah. Yeah.
Well, there's a reason why they don't put Alan on picture on the books.
Yeah, unless they powder my forehead.
I liked your new picture, Alan. I thought it was really good.
Oh.
Really nice.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. I don't know what Brian looks at, but I'll go and stalk him in a minute.
Well, no.
Yeah, I don't want you obsessing over me. Come on.
He's the young, good-looking man. You know, he is no.
I have 1 patch of hair left, so I technically, I guess maybe a little bit. Yeah.
The game.
Yes.
So up and coming stuff. Can I talk about that?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's what I was going to say. What's coming next?
Yeah. So the third Clyde Smith's detective stories, which is set in 1957 in Sydney, goes to the editor on this Saturday, and so that should hit the shelves in October. And then the third book in my World War II stories goes to the other editor in when is it? In August, and that'll be out early next year. And I have a short story in an anthology of gay mysteries based on holidays and July, which will come out in the middle of the year. And of course, me being me, I wrote to the editor and I said, "We don't have any holidays in Australia in July." He said, "I write about something that's really that you could twist about." So what did I do? I wrote a story set in 1947 about a young man who is given a forced-in holiday from work because he's having a bit of a nervous breakdown after the war and told to go on a holiday. So he goes to Darwin to discover what happens to his best mate who was presumably killed during the bombing of Darwin in 1942, and then discovers this big murder mystery in it. So everybody's really, really loved that, who did the beta reading, and the editors and the publishers. So that'll be come out in the middle of the year.
Wow.
With including such well-known authors as Michael Nava, people like that, Frank Butterfield, Brad Shreve, all. I'll be very happy to be part of that collection.
Wow.
And mind you, that book took me, that short story, 18,000 words, took me about 3 months of research to get right, because a lot of the material is still classified. People don't realise that the bombing of Darwin, there were more planes, more bombs, more ships sunk than Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And people don't realise that. It was the largest bombing attack on any city at the time in 1942 in the world, and that included Coventry in Britain.
Yeah. I just saw a little documentary show on that, actually, probably a month ago. It's pretty amazing.
Well, it was the anniversary of it. I think it must have been the 70th anniversary. Yeah. Or 80th anniversary. 42, 2022. Yep.
That's why you're a writer, not a mathematician.
Yeah. Fascinating part of history. So, and I've also visited Darwin quite a lot. I have a good pal who lives there, and he did a beta read for me just to make sure I get all the places right and all of how long it took to travel. But I think it's a really good murder mystery. It's it's also the first erotic book with eroticism I've written in 6 years. So that was actually quite fun to write. I'd forgotten how much I like writing nitty-gritty scenes.
So how did,
Although they're not like other people's nitty-gritty scenes. It's all comparative.
yeah, of course, right. But so when you're doing that, would you have to get in practice and get someone over and sort of work it out, the details?
No, my memory isn't that bad.
Oh, well, you might want to try some new things or see if certain things could work. And I don't know. I'm just trying to help out.
He's volunteering, is what he's saying.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just trying to help out. I'm there. I'm the writers. I'm the help for the writers. I'm the helping hand.
You're the muse for sure.
And look, can I give a general warning to perhaps female writers who write gay fiction? And there's a lot about. Don't base what we do by watching porn. Please.
Don't base anything. It doesn't have to be gay. Just anything.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's just it. I hear a lot of things like that.
Now get an editor. Ask your best gay friend to read it and go, is this possible? Is it possible to do this X thing on the first date? The answer is pretty usually no.
Yeah. But you have to wonder what, because I hear a lot of the male books like that have female readers as the primary.
Well, it is the male-to-male romance category is basically all women, a few men, but writing for other women. So that's the way that's evolved.
Yeah. So for me, it doesn't interest me, but now.
Well, look, so I think some of the stories I've read are really, really good, but they're not the ones that have a lot of sex scenes in them, because that's usually where it falls down. And look, honestly, you know yourself, men relate to each other in a completely different way than men and women relate to each other. I tried to explain it to somebody once. It's like pieces of a jigsaw. You have the indentation and then the bit that sticks out that fit together. That's male-female thing. But when you've got two bits that stick out together, or two indentations that bump up together, there's a lot more negotiation, because men, we're not brought up with expectations of how we're supposed to behave in relationships the way that men and women are, that the women have the babies, maybe do the most of the housework, and the guys, go out to work and stuff. You've got two guys having to always continually work out who does what, negotiating about the relationships. Because if there are two men, we have testosterone, so there's all those other sorts of things that have to be negotiated. So I think that's the big difference about really writing about male-to-male and male relationships.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting.
I don't know if you agree, but I mean, that's my feeling about it.
Yeah, I think for the most part I do, but again, a younger generation might see things differently.
Well, I think that probably is the case. I mean, people my age, I'm in my early 70s now. When I was brought up, there were very defined roles, that I remember having to be guarantor when my mother wanted to buy a car, and I was only 18.
Right.
Because she wasn't able to take out a loan.
Yeah.
She couldn't get a passport without her divorced husband allowing her to get a passport. Life was very different for women back then. And when you're brought up with the sort of mores that were in your family. So you get a whole lot of ideas about defined roles, and they're very, very hard to shake off. Very hard to shake off. Us older people fighting them all the time. I still open the doors for women. I still walk on the right-hand side when we're walking in the street. If I'm walking with a woman, I still say thank you. I still send thank you cards to people. I write little letters, if they've invited me to dinner, thanking them. It's a generational thing.
Wow.
Don't you, I don't know, do you open doors for women if you're with them?
No, I close them.
What an uncouth man.
No, I do. I was brought up that way too, so I have a lot of those habits myself, but I don't see that with the younger generation. I don't see that as a standard.
I don't mix with I don't have any younger generational friends anymore. I mean, my family's all now dead, and the closest I have is cousins, I suppose they're in their teens, who live in Chicago, who I've never actually ever met. So I don't get to see, when I was lecturing at university, I didn't get to see much of their social life. I just saw them as students, and we had, that sort of relationship, but I didn't get to see how they interact with each other without me around. So I don't really know what they do.
Oh, they just slap each other at the Oscars.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons I don't write contemporary books, because I have no idea about what's going on.
Well, that could be an idea for a new series. You could be brought back into the future.
I could write about a grumpy old man trying to negotiate his way through modern society. That would plenty of experience with that. Yeah. I went to a shop recently, a big department store, and I wanted to buy something, and it was $17.50, and I gave the girl $22.50, and she pulled out a calculator.
Oh. Good Lord!
And I said, "All I want is a $5 note, please." And she pulled out and I just thought, well, this is really indicative of how things have changed. And I'm not saying it's better or worse or anything like that. It's just that when I add up, I don't use my calculator. I still do it on a piece of paper and a pencil or in my head.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's how we do it. So we make it.
But I'm sure my grandparents were exactly the same. I'm sure they shook their heads over my mother and her brothers and sisters in their bobby socks and 1940s and 34,
Yeah, we see that. I think that's just the way it goes, So.
Yeah. I remember my grandmother, when we came home from a trip, once she said, "I can't wait to get inside and take my corset off and have a good old scratch." And I thought, that's a real sign of how different life is.
Well, I always like to get in and get a good scratch myself.
Yeah. Well, some things never change and some things never stay the same, I guess.
Well, Garrick, we are out of time, but it's been a great show. And of course,
it's been great.
Now the book you have to go out and get is called Servants of the Crown, and it's The Turkish Pretender. So, and the author has been a guest, Garrick Jones. Thank you for being here.
It's been my pleasure, guys. I have really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Same here. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me? Yeah. Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.